Hello. So, welcome to the first online program of the Metabolic Dietary Solutions program. And I'm just learning my way around this. So, thank you everybody for joining us today. And I will use a PowerPoint. So, basically, first of all, I'll just cover what is included in the Metabolic Dietary Solutions program. And then we will talk about strategies, and my associate Mikhal is also there. So she will also add some things in this. Okay. So what is the Metabolic Dietary Solutions Program? As you can see from our logo, it is functional fat loss. So nutrition science meets medicine. And you can see that the logo on top is a clock with a fork and a spoon on either side. So that clock, which is a plate which looks like a clock, has a lot of significance because once I explain what it is that we're going to do as a part of the program, you'll understand how important the clock is. So, what are the three basic components of the Metabolic Dietary Solutions program? There is functional medicine at the top. Then one component is time restricted eating or intermittent fasting and low carbohydrate eating. I'll briefly explain each of these components. So, why am I talking about low carbohydrate eating, and what is insulin resistance, and what is so important about the hormone insulin? So, most of the time in a traditional approach to fat loss or weight loss or what we want to call it, the approach is you eat more and you exercise less, so that's the reason you have excess body fat. And this has been the approach since a very long time. But any of you who have who's gone through that, I have personally gone through it, so I know that it doesn't work. And now we have a lot of studies which show that the calorie in calorie out hypothesis, which we call the CICO hypothesis, doesn't really work, because fat loss is actually a problem of hormone and biochemistry. One of the major hormones. Now, there are a whole lot of other hormones too, and I will, over a period of time, talk about the others as well. However, the most important hormone is insulin. Many of you probably know of insulin as the hormone that is being used for, in diabetes, as a treatment of diabetes, definitely type 1 diabetes, pregnancy diabetes, even in type 2 diabetes, it is being used. However, the important thing to remember is your body produces the hormone insulin. And there's a lot of finding out about insulin now. So, insulin is your fat fertilizer hormone, and that is an expression by a Harvard endocrinologist, Dr. David Ludwig. So, he says, remember that insulin is your fat fertilizer hormone. And I said before, excess body fat is not a problem of calorie in, calorie out. It is a problem of hormones and biochemistry. So, when you eat food, your insulin goes up. Now, this causes the sugar, that is carbohydrate from the food, to be stored in the liver as glycogen and as fat. Now, the liver has a certain, defined capacity for storing glycogen. So that is where a lot of the problem comes up. So this is a very, very, very basic way of explaining what insulin does. So insulin has two functions. It increases the entry of glucose into cells, and it turns on fat production. So you can see the hormone insulin, and it it turns on fat production, and it helps glucose entering into the cell. So when someone develops insulin resistance, it is a condition in which the body produces insulin but is unable to use it effectively. And the other interesting factor is high insulin can itself cause insulin resistance. However, I'm trying to simplify insulin a lot because it is complex, and it is, even I am just barely getting my head around all of that. So when I say that, what do I mean? If you do your blood work and you find that your insulin is, in the normal range, does it necessarily mean that it's normal? may not be, because the true test for insulin resistance and your risk for type 2 diabetes, and not only diabetes, it's a whole lot of other diseases, risk for heart disease, for dementia, for cancer, for mood disorders, for any disease you name, insulin resistance is related to it. And when I say insulin resistance, this is before somebody develops diabetes. So it turns out that the true test is actually something that we call a glucose tolerance test. And that is not a test that I recommend. So I'm not going to discuss that because it takes a long time. It takes about 4 hours to do it, where you measure sugar as well as insulin every hour. So my point being, if you just measure a fasting insulin level or a 2-hour post-meal insulin level, it may not exactly show you what is going on, because this is a continuum. So maybe in the past it was different, and now it is different. Or if you do the glucose tolerance test, and it is called a Kraft pattern, I'm not going to make it as complicated. So you may seek something completely different. So my point being, your insulin alone will not tell you a lot of stuff, but at the same time, it's important to know that. So, what is it that we mean when we say about time restricted eating and intermittent fasting? So, TRE is a really fascinating concept. So, it's based on Nobel Prize winning research. So, the Nobel Prize for Physiology and Medicine in 2017 was given for the researchers who found out the molecular mechanism for the body's biological clock. This is what we call the circadian rhythm. So, in simple terms, what it means is that your body has a clock, and this clock is there in every cell of your body. So, it starts in the brain, and as you can see from this picture, the clock functions in different ways in different organs. So you can see that the best coordination is in the afternoon, fastest reaction time is also in the afternoon. If you think back to our hunter-gatherer ancestors, you can understand why that would be important, because that is a time when most of them went hunting, right? Then you can see that there is melatonin secretion, which starts in the evening, but melatonin secretion stops, early on in the day. That is extremely important for sleep. Then bowel movement, deep sleep. Another very interesting feature is you can see that your blood pressure is not the same throughout the day and night. And this is very exciting to us because we can actually measure what your blood pressure is like throughout the day, and probably tailor your medication intake to the time when you need it the most. Anyway, I'm digressing from time restricted eating. So, in the last several years, there has been a lot of research in the field of circadian rhythm, or as the field is called, chronobiology. Basically, it is your body's clock. Now, what are the environmental cues that your body clock listens to? The two major ones are light falling on the eyes and food intake. So essentially, both the factors, the major ones which control how the clock functions, are things that are under your control. So how can you decide on how much of light falls on your eyes and at what times? That is why we talk about sleep, hygiene, how your room should be completely dark. And another thing you realize that studies in the last several years have shown that shift work, that is when you dysregulate your sleeping and your working time, is associated with a lot of disease like diabetes, heart disease. And in women, it has also been found to be associated with high risk for breast cancer. And the ambient light, if you just look outside, in bigger cities like Mumbai, there's a lot of light outside. So that also affects us. And food intake is something, obviously, that is something we can control, at least the time that we eat. So this was the exciting work. And in 2015, Dr. Sachin Panda from the Salk Institute at La Jolla in California did a fantastic study. So this is the app that he used, and this app is available free of cost on Android as well as iPhones. So what he did essentially is he had people tracking their food intake. and all of you today in this program, this is what I would highly recommend. I'm personally using it as well. So basically, all you do is the instructions are very clear, and you need to go to the website. I'll send all those details in the email that follows. So you use the app to track the food. So all you do is take a picture of your food. So the interesting part of this study was really fascinating because what did they do? So he found that the daily eating pattern in healthy adults is highly variable from day to day. This was a study in the US. In India, the findings were really, really exciting. Next is more than half of the adults eat for 15 hours or longer every day. Sleep duration parallels the fasting duration. As Dr. Panda says, you eat as long as your eyes are open. So reducing the daily eating duration can contribute to weight loss. And this particular paper is based on the fantastic science of chronobiology. So what do we mean when we talk about time-restricted eating? So another part of the study, this was very small, just 8 people. Those who ate for 14 hours in a day, they were asked to eat for just 12 hours. So what did they find? They found that in 16 weeks of study duration, the participants lost 3.27 kilograms of body weight. And this despite not changing what they ate. So if they continued eating whatever rubbish they were eating before, they continued eating that, but they just changed the time of eating. They just restricted it. They reported better sleep, better energy levels, less hunger at bedtime. And the even more interesting thing is these people voluntarily stayed on that eating pattern and remained on that even 1 year after the study was conducted. So all this improvement just by restricting your eating. Now, this was the Indian study, which was even more interesting. So Indians eat even longer. So the overnight fast in Western countries is usually nearer to 10 to 12 hours. In Indians, this was a study in the NCR area near Delhi. So overnight fast was just of 7 hours and 44 minutes. Of course, this study was just a feasibility study, so they did not check any blood work or anything like that. And do you notice the other interesting thing is 25% of meals were within just 1.5 hours of another. But even more significant is that most of them ate rice, chapati, ice cream. That means all the high carbohydrate food between 7 and 11 p.m. Now, further studies have shown that we are more insulin sensitive in the first half of the day versus the second half of the day. So if these people ate most of their carbohydrates in the second half of the day at a time when they were not as insulin sensitive, can you understand what that can mean for anyone who can change that? So maybe this is another reason why diabetes is like an epidemic in India. So when we talk about time-restricted eating, what are we saying? So it is eating during a smaller window of time instead of eating throughout the waking hours. So what are the different eating patterns that we talk about? So we talk about 12-12 or 14-10, 16-8, or 1 meal a day. So 12-12 means you fast for 12 hours. So essentially, it means you fast overnight. So you are fasting anyway. So every day when you're sleeping, obviously you're not eating when you're sleeping. So that's the fast that you do. So instead of the 7.5 to 8 hours, that is probably the average, and you will find out what it is for you when you actually start tracking. Instead of the 7 to 8 hours, first maybe just look at moving to 10 hours of fasting, because sometimes it may be a little difficult for you. So that's the reason we talk about a personalized approach, because it is different for each one of you. If you have a goal of, let us say you want to get rid of a whole lot of fat, maybe 20 kilograms of body weight, and most of it is fat, then obviously, something less intense will not give you as good results. Versus maybe you're somebody who wants to do something much easier, but you'd have to do it for a much longer period of time. So what I recommend to people is that if you can't have an early dinner would be highly recommended. So if you can follow the rule of no food after 7 p.m., Again, if you are used to eating your dinner at 10 p.m., 7 p.m., just doing it just the next day may be a little difficult. So slowly start moving your dinner time to maybe from 10 p.m. to 9:30 to 9 o'clock and so on. So figure out what works for you. I was talking to somebody recently. She said, "Oh, my husband reaches home late. So I wait to have my meal with him." I said, "No, then what you can do is don't have breakfast in the morning. So if you have dinner at 9, don't have a breakfast in the morning, have a brunch. So that way you can achieve the 12-12. Slowly you will find that doing 12-12 is fairly easy. So you move to a 14-10. So you eat during a 10-hour window. You don't eat for 14 hours. And similarly with 16-8. So 16-8 is what I have been doing now for a while. So I don't eat breakfast, and I was somebody who believed in breakfast a lot. And now, as I say, I'm eating my words for lunch. So 16-8, and then I eat during an 8-hour window. And sometimes it even happens that I end up eating just one meal a day. And that is possible for each one of you. It might sound very weird today, but the fact is, you don't feel hungry. So once your body changes from being used to using carbohydrates as fuel versus using your body fat, your own body fat as a fuel, you will not feel hungry. You'll not have those cravings. The more carbohydrates you eat, the more the cravings, the more the hunger, versus when your body is what we call, adapted to using your own body fat sources, you do not have as much hunger. So if you don't feel hungry, you're not going to eat, right? Next thing is intermittent fasting, and this is when I had one of my aha moments when I went to Dr. Jason Fung's clinic in Toronto in October last year. So, what is intermittent fasting? Fasting is the voluntary withholding of food for spiritual, health, or other reasons. So, many people say, so that is essentially starvation, right? So, it's going to put your body into a starvation mode. No, starvation is the involuntary absence of food, it is neither deliberate nor controlled. So, when a particular population is going through starvation situation, they don't know where the next meal is coming from. Versus in fasting, it is something you're voluntarily doing. So you can just, if you don't feel well enough, you just stop the fast, start eating something, and your fasting ends, and you can go back to being the way you felt before. So fasting is so fascinating, and this is where I realized that a lot of my patients are vegetarians, and for a vegetarian person to eat low carb is extremely difficult. And Michal and I had done a podcast on that, on low carbohydrate vegetarian eating. And Michal explained it so beautifully. It's just that the protein sources for a vegetarian, if you're looking at beans and lentils, all of them come with a carbohydrate source. So if you are eating lentils to give you the protein, what happens? You will by default get the carbohydrates as well. So if I could help people to move from eating lower carbohydrate, may not even be at the level of ketogenic diet, and I'll talk about ketogenic diet in another webcast. If they eat little less carbohydrates than they were eating before, that would make a huge difference. And along with that, if they can incorporate fasting, and fasting is something that people in India are used to. A lot of people do a lot of religious fasts. So this is like, it's free of cost. It's so wonderful. And after I went through fasting myself, I realized how exciting and how wonderful it was, and relatively easy to do. Again, it depends on a lot of what is going on in your life. So fasting may be something that you need to look at if you have a lot of fat loss to go through. So what do I mean? Now, this is my way of representing it in a picture. This is not an actual study or anything. So when you eat food, your insulin goes up along with the blood sugar. So carbohydrates increase your insulin the most. Next is protein, and least of all is fat. However, if you don't eat anything at all, your insulin doesn't go up. So like I said way back a few slides ago, insulin is your fat fertilizer hormone. So if your insulin doesn't go up, what happens? You start losing fat. So, what is the functional medicine component to our metabolic dietary solutions program? And if any of you have experienced, a consultation with one of us, you know that we go through each of these components. There's chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation is related to every disease you can think of, whether it is fat loss, whether it is heart disease, whether it is cancer, whether it is mood disorders, whether it is autoimmunity. All of them are related to chronic inflammation. Environmental toxins, exercise, food. Now you can see that food is in bigger font. There's a reason. In our world, food is of primary importance. So if you cannot change the way you eat, probably there isn't a lot we can do. Because to us, food is medicine. Food is signals to your genes. Food is signals to your gut microbes. Food is signals to so many different parts of your metabolism. Then come genes and epigenetics, gut, immune, brain, hormones. So besides insulin, cortisol is another hormone which is very important. Then all the sex hormones like testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, then DHEA, all of them are important for fat loss. Medications. Maybe the medicines that you're on, the prescription medicines, and some of the common ones are some of the ones used in psychiatry. Insulin itself increases weight. So all those things we need to look at. Then there is, of course, metabolic dysfunction, which is a very big component of the whole thing. Stress response. If you have a dysregulated stress response, definitely you will have a big challenge with fat loss. And not only fat loss is just one of the components of it. It will affect it will affect your risk for heart disease, your risk for diabetes, your risk for cancer, your risk for dementia, your risk for every disease you can think of. Targeted supplementation is another major area we look at, because supplementation it could be different for different people. Now, some of you I know are very, very much into exercise, and you are into marathons, and maybe you go to the gym every day. So for you, your supplement plan may be very different from compared to somebody who is probably just takes a walker outside, doesn't do, just walks the dogs or something like that, nothing very intense. So when you exercise more, you use up more of the nutrients. So are you repleting yourself adequately? So all these different areas we can look at. So what are some of the numbers to know? Most of you have received this Metabolic Dietary Solutions Program initial laboratory tests. This is a list of about 24 tests. Along with that, knowing your body weight. Yes, weight is not the only number that we look at, because your weight includes your fat mass, it includes your muscle, it includes your bone, it includes all your organs. So the number we really like to focus on is your body fat percentage. Now, you can see on the screen that body fat percentage is gray. So it's not necessary for you to know that, because sometimes it may be difficult if you don't have a weighing scale which tells you all of that. And you can use some devices. We have some in our clinic, but some of them don't show accurate results if you are dehydrated. So all those things. So essentially, we want to keep it as simple as possible. So checking your waist circumference and a waist to hip ratio. So waist circumference will tell us whether you have belly fat. Now, belly fat is way more metabolically active than fat in any other part of the body. So what is an unhealthy waist circumference? For men, more than 34 inches. For women, more than 31.5 inches. So the easiest way to measure this is by measuring your waist size with a tape measure at the level of the belly button. Unhealthy waist to hip ratio, you can see the ratio. So what do? Divide your waist circumference by your hip circumference. Sometimes these figures are so, unusual, because you look at somebody and you think, oh, they are probably quite healthy. But you don't realize that some of them have belly fat. So the belly fat puts them into a much higher risk for disease. And in India, particularly Indian women, men as well, it's really very, very common. And now I see even children being like that. So dangerous belly fat. So fat in different parts of your body means different things. Belly fat is dangerous fat. Higher the belly fat, also implies that you have more fat around your heart. So, heart, the fat around your heart is also very dangerous. So, why did I not focus on BMI? You realize that I did not mention BMI at all because most Asian Indians are thin outside, fat inside. So, they're toffee. So, you can see from this picture that Caucasian and someone who's black and an Asian, the fat percentage is different in each one of them. So, at the same body weight, an Asian Indian versus a Caucasian would have much higher percentage of body fat, and they can test those with fancy instruments, which we don't really need to do. So if you just measure your waist circumference, that would give you a really fair idea. And truthfully, when you start losing fat, you know it. You may not even have to measure because you start dropping, clothes sizes, and for that you don't really, and you, like a friend recently told me, oh, after eating the way you asked me to eat, I'm fitting into my old clothes. So you will know when it happens. So what are the different things that we are planning on tracking? And I am a participant in this program this